you guys so much. As Ram said, I'm really excited to be here, and I can't believe I haven't visited Vancouver for 11 years, despite the fact I'm a 2-hour plane ride away. So I had sushi last night. I went to spin class this morning. I feel like I'm settling into the rhythm of this city very well, maybe too well. I need my clicker. Sorry, guys. So I'm here to talk about product management. I've had this title for about 10 years in one way, shape, or form at Google and Facebook. And I think the really interesting thing here is that it is probably the most ambiguous job in tech, right? Unlike designers and engineers and marketing and PR folks who help us build things and launch things, you don't go to school for this. The output is basically, do your product succeed or not, right? So I get a lot of questions from my friends who are founders, who are hiring PMs, or designers and engineers asking, like, what is a good PM? What should I look for when I'm interviewing someone? And I kind of want to just start a conversation with all you guys today and maybe talk about a few stories of my time at Google and Facebook. I don't work at either company right now, so everything I say is my opinion only, and you guys will, take it as with a grain of salt, of course. So it's important, I think, for any of these discussions to start with kind of who this person is and what the story is. I think that, especially with product managers, if you pick 10 random PMs, you ask them what their story is, they'll be very different. Some of them might come from the industry. They might be BD people, or they might be salespeople who moved into this role. Some of them might be an engineer by background or a designer by background. For me, I grew up in Shanghai, China. I moved to Nebraska when I was 10 years old, and I had a pretty typical Midwestern upbringing. I worked jobs like retail and fast food, and I didn't write a single line of code until I was 17 years old. I was at Sandia National Labs. I had an internship as a college cyber defender, which means I was supposed to hack into government systems. Obviously, I don't have this job right now, nor do I work for the NSA. But it was a fun summer, and it made me not fall in love with computers, but with the idea what they could do, right? So I went to school for computer engineering, half EE, half CS. My plan as a good Asian girl was to go get a PhD and follow in my parents' footsteps. They both had PhDs, and maybe go into academia research. That was honestly how I thought I would put my stamp on the world. And then the summer before my senior year in college, I got a scholarship from Google for women in technical roles and degrees. And I got to meet some great people, including Larry, circa 2004. And I decided to kind of take a leap and take a job as an associate product manager. I had no idea what that meant. When I told my parents I wanted to do this, my mom actually cried. And it was like, you're not getting your PhD, but you just took your GRE. You could go to Stanford, Rose. So, it was a bit of drama, but obviously hindsight being 2020, it was a good decision. Got to work on some amazing things. Some you all still probably use, like Gmail. Others are in the archives of the internet, like Google Desktop, which is a local desktop search product. iGoogle, which is a personalized homepage product. Mac Fuse, which is even before Objective-C. This is Cocoa APIs that Google launched for developers on the Mac, right? So a ton of things. A lot of them are great. I had awesome experiences. I learned what a product manager does from some of the best engineers and designers and people in the industry. But some things also didn't go so well. This is literally a Wikipedia article you can look up right now that talks about a redesign that I helped lead as a PM. And you can see that people weren't super happy about it. So that's something Spencer and I, I'm sure, will talk a little bit more about. After Google, I really wanted to go start my own thing. I wanted to go somewhere smaller. I had the Valley bug, but then I got roped into Facebook. And the draw was basically to be the first PM on a very small mobile team. And I felt like even at that time, mobile and social were going to be a big part of our future. And I wanted to not only be part of it, but help define it. So again, about 5 years later, I got to work some really cool stuff. Open Graph, if you guys are cursing me for API changes, I'm really sorry, but it had to happen. My last job is leading the photos teams. I worked on everything, sharing to viewing photos on Facebook. Also a couple side projects like Moments and Slingshot, which you guys may or may not have played with, as well as many, many iterations of just the mobile product for Facebook in general. So now I'm here. It's been 10 years. I'm taking another step back and looking at what's next. And I want to just kind of talk a little bit about like what I've learned and what I think is a good PM and what the job is about, right? So we'll start with the myth. which is, what do people think PMs do? So here are my top 5 myths about PMs. They are fast-talking MBA types. They all worship Steve Jobs and want to be him. They're not technical at all. They just make Gantt charts all day. They love processing email. And everyone has to do what they say. So all of these are false. Because if you put them together, this is a person that you do not want to be in the same room with. Right? And that's actually the least productive thing you could do as a PM, is not have anyone want to be with you. Right? So here's my cheat sheet for what a good PM versus a bad PM is. Don't worry, you don't have to read it all right now. We'll go through it step by step. But there are 4 criteria I use when I think about hiring, where I think about, as I'm managing PMs, how they're doing and where they can improve themselves. So first and most important is that they are the CEO of their product. I know that phrase is a little cliche, because what does it mean to be a CEO? But ultimately it means the buck stops with you. So there are no excuses. This is, you are the expert about your product, about the market, about the competition. When something happens, when you run into problems, it's your job to solve it. It is not anyone else's job. It's your job to ask for help if you need it, right? Whereas a bad PM, you can think about patterns like a lot of excuses. Well, Microsoft, is a much bigger company. They have way more engineers than we do. I never got the design support I needed, right? Or, this was a bad idea. I told you in the beginning, but we had to do it anyways because the CEO said so, right? There's a distancing yourself from the product and from the decisions that you make. And those are bad signs, right? That's not the person you want in the trenches with you. The second thing is that a PM is responsible for decisions end to end. So it is deciding what to build, when to build it, and how to build it, right? So I think you guys have probably all experienced this. There are people with great ideas. There are people you love brainstorming with because, they're just so fun. And they're like, what if we built Tinder for X or Uber for Y or whatever, right? Or, oh my God, we're so good at this, let's do X. But they have no idea how to make their visions reality, right? When it comes down to what do we build first? What does the MVP look like? Is this really a sustainable market, right? How big is this? How long would it take for us to test our hypothesis? They don't know how to do that. The other side of it is someone who is great at executing. So if you tell them build, a autoresponder for email, right? They'll do it. But is it a good idea? Is it the right thing for you to do right now? They don't think about it, right? So this is obviously a spectrum where people develop their skills along the way. When you're junior, right, when you're just starting out in this job, you're going to kind of execute a lot more than you're ideating. But the idea is the ideal PM takes control of the process end to end. Communications. And so I think it's no-brainer that PMs do a lot of communicating. And in fact, that's primarily the reason they're hired for, right? If engineers and designers and founders just all talk to each other and didn't need to ever worry about the organization scaling, you don't necessarily need a product manager, right? But the thing is how they do it. So I was talking to Spencer about this, and he's like, come on, PMs do like process. They do. They set them up, right? But I think the point is a good PM treats process and communications as something that they reluctantly give into. So they want to keep the room as small as possible. They communicate efficiently. They're clear on who decisions makers are. They write things down when it makes sense, right? But not, the 20-page spec that no one will read. Whereas a bad PM is always fighting fires. They assume that hallway conversations turn into action when it doesn't necessarily happen. And they blame the other person, right, when it doesn't happen. And then the last thing, and I touched on this a little bit, this is someone you actually want to work with. This is actually someone you want to be stuck at the airport with if it comes down to it. Because let's be honest, building stuff is hard, right? Most of the time, it's not fun. I mean, most of the time it is fun, but there's these moments, right, where you're like, it's midnight and I don't know if we're going to fix this bug in time, right? Or we just launched something, but look at the Wikipedia article that just came up about our product that we worked on for 6 months, right? And at that point, you want someone you trust and you want someone you like by your side. And you want someone who's going to take all the blame and give away all the credit. That's the kind of person who makes a great PM. And that's actually something I filter for heavily when I'm hiring, right? The other side of it is this is a person that people stop valuing. They're asking, why are they in the room, right? Why do they have to be in this meeting? Designers will say, I think they kind of stop my creative flow. Let's talk later in the cycle, right? They don't want their input early on. So those are warning signs beyond the very obvious Dilbert-like things, which I think we can all screen for a little bit earlier, right? I think a good PM constantly asks, how can I help you? Rather than what can you do for me, right? So the other thing people ask me about is what type of PM should I hire? Because we're not all created equal. And unlike engineers, where you can say, I need a front-end engineer who's great at iOS, right? You can be very specific what your needs are. It's a little more ambiguous what is a good PM. And I know this is unreadable. I promise I'll get better. So I have kind of 4 archetypes that I've encountered and I think about when I think about the creation of a PM team. So the first one is a scrappy young generalist. These are all my own quotes. So this is basically me at 22, to use the very personal example. This is someone you hire for the potential, right? They have no idea how to do the job. They'll probably mess it up a few times before they get it right? But the idea is that you're hiring them because they're smart, they learn really fast, and what you need is someone who can juggle a lot for you and willing to take on anything, right? They're great for projects, for instance, if you're in a small startup and the founder has a strong product mentality, but they need someone to start blocking and tackling because they have so many other things to do. Or at a large organization where you have a lot of mid-price projects that are getting neglected and you have senior leadership that are willing to do mentoring. Mentorship is pretty key to the success of this person, right? They're terrible for mission critical projects. Obviously, you're literally putting someone who's never driven in the driver's seat, right? Or for these projects where, you're like, I think in 6 months, we may want to go into this area. Let's figure out there's something interesting that we can build, right? There are no engineers, there are no designers, they're kind of off in the long ideating. It's not usually a good recipe. The second type of PM is probably the one that people think about most often, at least outside of kind of the tech community, right? If you ask what a product manager does. This is someone with a strong business background. They may have come from sales. They may have done partnerships before, right? They're great for B2B businesses or anything where you need a sales force and you need a partnerships team, and they have empathy and they've done the job. So they understand what it means to do this job and to make sure all of it comes together, right? And they bring a lot of maturity to the team, right? Especially when you're trying to sell contracts to large enterprises. And they're great in those contexts. What they're not so good at is mass market consumer products where it is really blue sky. The user feedback is very vague, right? And hard to quantify. Or infirm projects where the engineers really want someone to speak geek with them, right? And that just takes a lot. The designer PM, I know there are a lot of designers here, so this is the guy you love working with, or the girl. This is the person who has a huge quality bar and exquisite taste, right? And basically, usually I like to bring them into projects that have lost their way a little bit, where the product itself is good, but the bugs and the polish level is just not there, and the engineers have gotten used to a quality bar that is not sustainable, right? So those are great people to bring in to kind of step up the game, right? And make something beautiful, right? This is someone you want when quality really, really matters. They have a tough time when a project is fast and scrappy and you're shipping rough prototypes all the time just to see what's working, because it really bugs them that these things are unpolished, right? And they're not beautiful yet and they're putting their name to it. Or projects that are really ill-defined because they want to get into details, they want to get into pixels and they can't, right? Not for a while. And the last one is the executor. So this is someone who really knows how to drive a team and set a schedule and get shit done. And they're generally good at a lot of different things. They wear a lot of hats, right? And they are really good basically at shipping things, right? So it's great when you have product market fit and you just need to move really fast before the competition comes in. Not so good for completely blue sky projects where they are itching to build something right away, but they need to wait and they need to do research and there's a lot of other components to it. So again, all of these come with caveats because people are unicorns, which means that every relationship and every person is different. No one neatly fits into a bucket usually, but good things to think about when you say, what do I want to hire for? What am I missing, right, on my team? And then the other question I get all the time is, what do you do all day as a product manager? So, or even from people I interview, it's like, what is your date like? And the short answer is meetings. But I usually have a hard time answering this with a short quip because I actually think it changes depending on the type of product you work with and then also the cycle you are in the product. So here's my attempt to answer this question in a little more nuanced of a way. In the what product cycle, this is where you're deciding what to build, right? I generally think you're spending huge amount of your time, 60%, let's say, on product strategy. So this is ideally for you a small room, a group of people you love working with, designer, engineer, right, builders, and the whiteboard, right? This is where all the crazy things come out. This is where you try different flows every day. This is where, you go to cafes and ask people with like rough paper prototypes, like, would you use this? Is it useful? It's really fun, right? You do have some communicating and execution overhead because you are still building stuff. And you do need to tell people what you're doing and make sure that your stakeholders aren't like, wait, did we get into the self-driving car business all of a sudden? So that's that cycle. And then the second cycle is build. So this is you decide what you want to do, and now you're in the midst of actually figuring it out and getting it done. So the thing that I think all of you guys will know is that there's a dozen little decisions that need to be made every day, right? There are things like, hey, do we care about Android Jelly Bean, right? Actually working? Do we care about performance right now? Should this be more prominent than that, right? And these are decisions that a PM helps facilitate during this phase. They're either making the call where they're working with designers to do it, or they're figuring out basically, no, don't worry about this right now. Let's just move on, right? And they're also figuring out along the way, if you're doing this right, how to fail fast. So you're probably getting it wrong the first time you decide what to build, right? It's kind of the truism in our industry, right? So basically figuring out how wrong you are and being able to course correct during this time is pretty critical. You are starting to ramp up communications overhead. You are starting to run team meetings. You probably have infra people you need to interface with and marketing people, and you're talking to your stakeholders about how big the team needs to be when the launch is happening, all this stuff. And then you finally get to launch, where this is where the meetings get really crazy because suddenly everyone wants to know everything, right? And you're trying to take the burden off the engineering design team so they can focus on actually shipping this thing, right? So you're hopefully spending your sanity time with the design and engineering team saying, yes, let's polish this, let's do this, here's P1 and P2, and making sure shit gets done and you're actually shipping something. But a lot of your time is blocking and tackling, making sure the legal team understands what's going on, understanding the PR positioning, right? Making sure that, there are no conflicts with the launch, knowing what build cycle you're going into with the release team, all these hundreds of little things you need to check off to make sure things are successful. So with that, this is my short primer on my opinions on product management, and I'm going to invite Spencer up to come hang out with me and have an exciting chat.